After checking my license, police said. Your parents declared you dead 2 years ago. Then stay with me through this story. And if it moves you, don't forget to show your love by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. I was just driving home from work that evening, nothing out of the ordinary. My little beat-up car was all I had, and I was saving every penny to keep it running. When the flashing lights pulled up behind me, I thought it was just a routine stop. Maybe I forgot to signal, or my tail light was out again. I wasn't nervous, at least not at first. The officer came to my window, asked for my license and registration. I handed them over with shaky hands. He looked at the card, then back at me, then at the card again. His expression changed in a way that made my stomach twist. It wasn't the usual bored look officers give. It was something else, shock, confusion, maybe even disbelief. Miss Caldwell, he said slowly, do you know you've been legally declared deceased for 2 years? At first I thought he was joking. I let out a laugh that didn't sound right, waiting for him to smile back and say he was kidding. But he didn't. He just stood there, his face serious, holding my license like it was a piece of evidence. My heart dropped. Excuse me? What are you talking about? I'm right here. He told me to step out of the car. People driving past slowed down, staring, making me feel like some kind of criminal. I stood there under the streetlights, cold air hitting my skin, and for the first time in my life I felt invisible and exposed all at once. He explained that the system showed my name flagged as deceased, listed from an accident 2 years ago. He asked me where I'd been since then, what I'd been doing, as if I was lying about existing. I kept repeating the same thing. I'm alive, I've been alive this whole time. Inside, I was panicking. How could I be dead when I'd been working double shifts, paying bills, and just trying to survive? I wanted to scream, but I swallowed it because I didn't want to make things worse. The officer finally let me go after double-checking with his supervisor, but the damage was done. Everyone around saw me being questioned like I was a fraud. My cheeks burned with humiliation. When I got back in the car, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove home that night in silence, my mind racing. Somebody had to have done this. Somebody close to me. Because who else could go that far? Who else knew enough about me to erase me from life on paper? I thought about my parents. About the way they never really wanted me around. The way they always made me feel like I didn't belong. And as much as I didn't want to believe it, deep down I already knew the truth. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. And it was personal. The next morning, I couldn't get any sleep. My mind kept replaying the officer's words, his voice echoing in my head like some twisted nightmare. Declared deceased. I needed answers, and I knew where to start. I drove straight to the local records office. My hands were sweating as I filled out the request forms, the clerk giving me a confused look when I asked if they had anything on my death. She tapped away on her keyboard, then frowned at the screen. Give me a minute, she said, before disappearing into the back. When she returned, she carried a thin file. She slid it across the counter like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This is what's on record, she said carefully, watching my face. I opened it with trembling fingers. My name was there, Nia Caldwell, date of birth, all correct. But the death certificate? It claimed I had died in a car accident 2 years ago on a rainy night just outside of town. I stared at it, my throat dry. An accident that never happened. I was alive, yet here it was, stamped and signed like my existence had been erased. Who filed this? I asked, my voice breaking. The clerk hesitated, then pointed to the line marked next of kin. The names hit me like a punch, Bernard and Latrice Caldwell. My parents. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I'd always known my parents weren't loving. They weren't the kind to cheer for me at school or hug me when I cried. But this wasn't neglect. This was betrayal in its cruelest form. I left the office clutching the file to my chest, my stomach twisting. Outside, the sun was shining like it was any normal day, but for me, the world had tilted. My own parents had signed me away as dead. In the car, I flipped through the rest of the file. That's when I noticed another document, insurance paperwork. My so-called death had triggered a payout, $500,000. The beneficiary wasn't me, obviously. It was them, or maybe even my brother. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I sat there in the parking lot, the papers spread across my lap, tears stinging my eyes. They hadn't made a mistake. They hadn't misunderstood. They had planned this, profited from it, and gone on with their lives as if I'd never existed. The anger hit me harder than the shock. Every memory of my childhood came flooding back. My father calling me a burden, my mother looking away when I begged for attention, the favoritism toward Darius. They had erased me on paper because, in their eyes, I was never worth keeping around. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They thought I was gone. They thought I'd never find out. But I was still here. And I was going to make sure they regretted every single signature on that file. When I drove away from the records office, my hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't fear. It was fury. My parents hadn't just forgotten about me or cut me off. They'd erased me. And as I sat there with the file on the passenger seat, memories I had buried deep started clawing their way back. I thought about being a little girl, standing in the kitchen while my mom, Latrice, fussed over my brother Darius's science project, completely ignoring the one I had worked on for weeks. I remembered my father, Bernard, patting Darius on the back and calling him the pride of the family, while looking at me like I was extra baggage they had to drag along. It wasn't just once or twice, it was every single day of my childhood. Birthdays were the hardest. Darius always had a party, balloons, gifts stacked on the table. My birthdays? Sometimes they forgot altogether. One year I got a card with no money inside while Darius opened a brand new gaming console. I learned early that in their eyes, I wasn't worth celebrating. They never said it out loud, but their actions screamed it. I was a burden. My father would sigh when I asked for school supplies. My mother would roll her eyes when I cried after being bullied. The only thing they seemed united on was reminding me I wasn't good enough. Why can't you be more like Darius? That was their favorite line. It followed me like a curse. By the time I turned 16, I stopped asking for anything. I got a job at a diner and bought my own clothes, my own notebooks, even paid for my own phone bill. They didn't care, as long as they didn't have to spend money on me. I became invisible in my own home, a ghost long before they made me one on paper. The day I turned 18, I packed a single suitcase and left. They didn't fight me. They didn't even ask where I was going. My father just muttered, "Don't come crawling back." My mother stayed silent, eyes glued to the floor. I walked out of that house with no plan, just a desperate need to breathe somewhere they couldn't reach me. I had told myself for years that leaving was freedom, that putting distance between us was the only way to heal. But now, holding the evidence of what they'd done, I realized the truth. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had gone one step further. They had declared me dead, like I had never been their daughter at all. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something else stirred: determination. If they thought they could erase me, they were wrong. I wasn't a ghost. I was alive, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to run away. I was going to face them. And I was going to make sure they understood exactly what it meant to bury someone who refuses to stay buried. I sat outside their house for nearly 10 minutes before I could bring myself to step out of the car. The place looked the same as it always had. Fresh paint on the porch, neatly trimmed lawn, the kind of picture-perfect home that hid the ugliness inside. My chest tightened as I walked up the steps. I hadn't been here in years, and now I was coming back not as a daughter, but as someone who had been written off as dead. I didn't bother knocking softly. I rang the bell hard and loud. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there stood my father, Bernard. His face froze. For a second, I thought he might collapse right there. Instead of joy, instead of disbelief that his daughter was alive, all I saw was fear flashing in his eyes. "Nia," he muttered, his voice cracking. No, that can't be right." "It's me," I said firmly, staring straight at him. "And you know it." He shook his head, already retreating, his big frame blocking the doorway. "You must be mistaken. Whoever you are, you shouldn't be here." I clenched my fists at my sides. Mistaken? As if I didn't know my own life? The anger boiled in my stomach, but I kept my voice steady. "I saw the paperwork. I know what you did." Behind him, I caught sight of my mother, Latrice. She stood in the hallway, her hands clasped tightly, eyes wide with terror. She didn't say a word. She didn't move. Just stared at me like she was looking at a ghost that had come back to haunt her. Before I could say more, footsteps thudded down the stairs. My brother Darius appeared, his usual cocky smirk plastered across his face. He looked me up and down, then laughed under his breath. "Well, isn't this something?" he said casually, like I had just shown up at the wrong party. "You're not supposed to be here, Nia." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not surprised. Not shocked. Just annoyed, as if I had ruined their perfect little plan by daring to exist. I took a step forward, but Bernard blocked me again. "Leave now," he ordered, his voice shaking. "Go back to wherever you've been hiding." Hiding? That word stung. I had been living, working, struggling to build a life on my own, while they were living off the money they got by burying me on paper. And now, they had the nerve to act like I was the one out of place. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself not to scream, not to let them see how badly I was shaking inside. Instead, I looked at each of them, my father's hard glare, my mother's silent terror, Darius's smug grin, and I made a promise to myself. They thought they could erase me and move on. They thought I'd vanish quietly. But I wasn't leaving. Not this time. I was going to make sure every single one of them paid for what they had done. I started pulling every paper I could find, thinking if there was any mistake it would show up in the fine print. I sat at the kitchen table with a lamp and a stack of envelopes, feeling like an investigator in my own life. Old bills, bank statements, and a few legal letters were taped into folders. Each new page made the picture clearer and angrier. One envelope held an insurance statement. My name was listed as the insured, but the claim told another story. It showed a payout dated the month after the recorded accident. The number at the bottom made my breath stop. $500,000. For a second I sat very still, the paper trembling in my hand. More documents were worse. There was the death certificate with the notary stamp. There were forms naming a beneficiary, and at the top of those forms, in neat print, was Darius Caldwell's name. He was listed as the primary receiver. I had imagined them taking me for granted, but I had never imagined them signing away my existence for a check. I called places I had never thought to call before. The insurance company, a local attorney who handled estates, and a friend at the county office. Each call confirmed the same cold fact. The paperwork was real, the signatures matched, and a large sum had been transferred. The answers were clinical and unhelpful. They explained legal forms and next of kin authority, but none of that eased how betrayed I felt. I thought about Darius's new car lot, the quiet pride in his voice when he talked about investors, and the nights he showed off his latest purchase. Seeing his name on those papers felt like a knife. It proved this was more than thoughtlessness. It was planned. They had turned my life into a transaction. Grief mixed with a sharp, focused fury. The grief was for the birthdays missed, the silent dinners, the nights I pretended everything was fine. The fury was for the certainty that those memories had been traded for cash. I pictured the meeting where they decided this, the way words could make a person disappear on paper. That coldness became a tool. Instead of breaking, I began organizing what I had found. I made copies, notes, and lists. I started a file I labeled clearly, evidence. I knew emotion alone wouldn't bring justice. Paperwork would. Witnesses might. A plan had to be methodical. The betrayal hurt like a wound, but it also sharpened resolve I hadn't known I had. I traced bank notices and found a transfer into a business account tied to Darius. Proof was vital. With evidence in hand, anger turned into a plan. Expose them, reclaim my name, seek justice. I sat on Tiana's couch with the courthouse folder between us, watching her read every page like it was a thriller. Tiana had been my friend since second grade. She knew the scared kid who hid during recess and the stubborn girl who taught herself to change a tire. When I finished explaining, she didn't blink. She folded the papers and said, "We'll fix this. You shouldn't do it alone." She wanted to call the police right then. "They committed fraud," she said. Her voice was sharp, and for a moment I almost believed a phone call could set everything straight. But I'd seen how my parents could smile and lie with the same calm tone. I pictured Bernard in an interview, saying he'd been confused and that the signatures were a mistake. We built another plan. Tiana became my first ally not just in spirit, but in action. We split the work like soldiers preparing for a quiet war. She handled logistics, locking down copies of bank transfers, calling numbers and pretending to be a relative to record what agents would say. I focused on going back to the house to gather what they left in plain sight. Old mail, receipts, any ledgers that could link Darius to the insurance money. I bought a cheap recorder and tucked it into a backpack. When I visited, I kept my tone casual, asking questions that seemed small. "Did you get a notice from the insurance company?" Or, "How's the business doing?" If they brushed me off, I steered the talk toward money and paperwork. Sometimes I left with nothing more than an exhausted feeling. Other times I left clutching a receipt that mentioned a transfer or a note about account changes. Each scrap mattered. Tiana set up a spreadsheet. She logged dates, names, and amounts. "Numbers don't lie," she would say. When we needed legal clarity, Tiana found a lawyer who offered a first consultation at low cost. We paid with cash and told our story without dramatics, laying out documents like evidence on a kitchen table. The lawyer said we had a case but warned that family fraud could turn messy. He advised collecting sworn statements and maintaining chain of custody. So we did. We photographed files, notarized witness notes, and duplicated every page. We practiced how I would say the facts without emotion, calm and steady, because rage can be used against you in court or in public. We built our case quietly, deliberately, step by step, turning pain into paperwork and betrayal into a methodical push for truth. As the stack of evidence grew, so did a steady certainty in me. This wasn't revenge alone. It was about proving I existed and holding them accountable in a way they couldn't erase. Tiana stayed by my side through late nights and unexpected threats. Her faith turned my fear into action, and each small victory, one notarized page, one recorded confession, felt like reclaiming a piece of a life they tried to steal from me. I slipped into the house like I always used to, quiet steps, pretending I belonged. The recorder was tucked deep in my coat pocket, a small thing that felt heavy with the weight of what I hoped to catch. I told them I'd come by to drop off old photo albums I'd found, a harmless pretense. They didn't suspect. Why would they? They had already convinced themselves I was a ghost in the paperwork, not a threat at the kitchen table. They gathered in the den, voices low and loose, comfortable in their scheme. Darius' laugh cut through first, loud and careless. "It was more flawless than I thought," he said, and the words landed like a slap. "People sign things, people die on paper, and the check's clear. Who would have figured?" Bernard's voice followed, soft but steady, the kind that once hushed my childhood protests. "You did good, son. That money changed the game." There was an ease to his tone I used to crave. Now it felt poisoned. Investors felt safer seeing the account's balance. Latrice and I handled the rest. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the recorder buzzed against my ribs. Every syllable was proof. Darius talked about the car lot expansion, the new supplier, how the insurance payout had smoothed a few skeptical meetings. He name-checked people I'd never met, clients, lenders, tracing a map from fraud to profit. It was clinical, transactional, the way they discussed me like inventory cleared from a ledger. Latrice's voice trembled when she spoke. "I didn't think," she began, and for a second I thought she might stand up for me. "I just wanted us to be okay," she whispered. Regret cracked her words. "I didn't know it would." "Don't start," Bernard snapped, sharper than I'd heard in years. "We did what needed doing. You're making it worse." His dismissal rolled over her, suffocating any doubt. Latrice fell silent, the apology swallowed by their collective greed. Her regret had never been enough to break their plans. It was merely a footnote. When Darius bragged about how easily they'd cash me out, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the money or the signatures or the fake accident. It was the coldness, the way they'd reduced my life to a line item and moved on without a flinch. The realization that I'd been deliberately erased by the people who were supposed to love me tore at a place I had kept carefully stitched. I left before they noticed, palms slick with sweat, the recorder a warm weight under my jacket. In the car, listening back, I felt the betrayal in high definition. Every laugh, every justification, every dismissive word was a nail. The hurt burned, but under it a new force took hold. Something steady and hard, like steel tempered in fire. Justice would start with the facts, I knew that. But this was uglier than legal papers could fix. Their faces in that recording weren't just evidence, they were targets. I wanted them to feel the exposure, to lose the safety their cash had bought them, to watch their friendships and reputations unravel the way mine had been unsewn. I didn't want them harmed. I wanted them stripped of the comfortable illusions they used to sleep at night. I began planning ways to make their arrogance public, to peel back their masks one careful, inevitable layer at a time. The rage was no longer a raw thing. It had shape. It had direction. It would be precise, relentless, and deeply personal. I mailed the first package to the insurance company using an anonymous drop box. Inside were copies of the death certificate, bank transfers, and the recording of Darius bragging about how easy it was to cash me out. I didn't add a name or return address, just enough information for them to see something was very wrong. Then I waited. It didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, investigators were calling my parents' house. Letters arrived stamped with bold seals. Neighbors saw men in suits on the porch asking questions. The quiet little lie they had built was starting to come apart, and I wasn't done yet. While the investigation brewed, I turned my attention to Darius. He had built his car lot on flashy promises, convincing people he was a businessman to trust. But I knew the truth: late payments, cut corners, shady deals with suppliers. I gathered what I could and sent that trail of evidence to a local blogger known for exposing scams. The article hit like a lightning bolt. Rising star or crooked dealer? The truth behind Caldwell Motors. Investors started pulling back. Customers whispered. Within a month, sales dropped, and his carefully polished image began to crack. But I didn't stop at documents and blogs. I knew small towns thrived on whispers. All it took was me sitting in a diner, letting a mistaken comment slip. "Did you hear the Caldwells got questioned by fraud investigators?" I'd ask with wide eyes. At the grocery store, I dropped another line. Strange how Darius got rich right after his sister's accident. People love a story, and soon they were telling mine for me, spreading suspicion faster than I ever could. The results rolled in like dominoes. Bernard, once the reliable employee at his company, was quietly asked to step down. They couldn't risk having someone tied to insurance fraud on their payroll. He stormed home red-faced, but it didn't change the decision. Darius, drowning in canceled contracts, lashed out online, calling the rumors lies. But no one listened. Investors stopped answering his calls, and suppliers demanded payments up front. His empire was built on air, and without the money from my death, it folded. Even Latrice, who had always hidden behind church pews and polite smiles, wasn't spared. Her friends began avoiding her, sitting farther away during Sunday service. Whispers followed her through the aisles, prayers replaced with judgment. She walked out one morning and never came back, too ashamed to face the people who once looked up to her. Piece by piece, the walls they built around their fraud crumbled. I didn't need to scream or confront them publicly. I just loosened the right bricks, and the whole house came down on its own. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. They had stolen my identity, erased my existence, but now it was their turn to be invisible, stripped of respect, money, and power. Their empire of lies was collapsing, and I was the one pulling the strings. I chose the night carefully, after the rumors had spread and the investigations had already rattled their walls. I walked into the Caldwell house with a folder under my arm and a steadiness in my chest I hadn't felt before. They were all there, Bernard slumped in his chair, Latrice wringing her hands, and Darius pacing like a caged animal. I placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it without a word. Inside were the copies of the insurance papers, the transfers, and a transcript of the recording. Their eyes darted over the evidence, and I watched the cracks appear in their faces. Bernard's jaw clenched, Darius's smirk faltered, and Latrice's lips trembled. Bernard was the first to speak, his voice hard. "We had no choice. You don't understand what it's like trying to keep a family afloat. That money..." I cut him off. "That money was my life. You didn't just betray me. You buried me. On paper, you killed your own daughter because a payout meant more than I did." Latrice finally broke. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "I didn't want to. I was scared, Nia. Your father said it was the only way, and Darius..." She glanced at him, her voice shrinking. "I thought I was protecting the family." I stared at her, my chest tight. "Protecting the family? You chose them over me. You watched me disappear and stayed quiet. That isn't protection. That's complicity." Darius, refusing to stay silent, stepped closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You act like you were worth something. You were nothing but a burden. And guess what? We made more with you gone than you ever would have brought alive." His words hit me like knives, but I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for that moment, the final insult that showed exactly who he was. Slowly, I leaned forward, my voice calm, steady, unshakable. "You're right about one thing," I said. "You made your money. But it's over now. Because the authorities? They're already on their way." For the first time, silence filled the room. Bernard's face went pale, the confidence draining from him. Latrice gasped, covering her mouth. And Darius, his smirk collapsed completely, replaced by panic he couldn't hide. I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood, looking down at them one last time. For years, they had held power over me, making me feel small, invisible, unwanted. But tonight, I wasn't the ghost they had declared me to be. I was the storm that had come back to destroy everything they built on lies. Without another word, I walked out the front door, leaving them with the truth and the sound of sirens in the distance. For once, the fear wasn't mine, it was theirs. I was in control, and they were finally facing the reckoning they thought would never come. The flashing red and blue lights painted the Caldwell house in chaos. Officers poured inside, their voices firm and commanding as Bernard tried to bluster his way through lies that collapsed under the weight of the evidence. Darius's bravado was gone, replaced with shouting and resistance as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Their downfall wasn't dramatic in the way movies make it. It was quieter, heavier, like watching rotten would finally snap under its own weight. Latrice sat on the edge of the couch, her face streaked with tears. She didn't fight. She didn't plead. She only rocked slightly, whispering to herself as if she could pray the moment away. For the first time, I saw her not as the mother who ignored my pain, but as a woman trapped in the wreckage of choices she had helped create. Still, pity didn't soften the truth. Her silence had been its own weapon, and now she too was powerless. I stood in the doorway, my heart steady as I watched the scene unfold. For years, I had carried their cruelty, their rejection, their lies. Tonight, the weight shifted. It wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. Bernard locked eyes with me as the officers led him out, his face twisted with rage. He wanted to curse me, I could see it, but the words never came. Darius, on the other hand, spat venom until the very end, shouting that I had ruined everything. His voice grew smaller as they shoved him into the back of the patrol car, and for the first time in my life, his words didn't matter. I took a deep breath, stepping outside into the cool night air. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. The sky was wide and dark, but it no longer seemed suffocating. It was open, endless mine. Walking down the sidewalk, I felt the burden slide off me piece by piece. This wasn't just revenge, it was release. I hadn't needed to lift a hand against them. The truth had been sharper than any weapon, and it had cut them down completely. Behind me, the house that had once been my prison stood dim and silent, a shell of everything I had endured. Ahead of me stretched the unknown, but for once I welcomed it. I wasn't the girl they had declared dead. I wasn't the daughter who had been erased for money. I was Nia Caldwell, alive, whole, and free. As I reached the end of the street, I allowed myself a small smile. Their empire was gone, their lies shattered, their names dragged through the mud. And me? I was still standing. This wasn't just survival. It was rebirth. And in that moment, I knew I didn't need them, their approval, or their love. My future was mine to claim, and I would build it from the ground up, with no ghosts chasing me and no chains holding me back. Do you believe Nia was right to cut ties completely and choose her freedom? Or should she have given her family another chance despite everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if stories like this keep you hooked, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next.